The next segment is a bit of a coup for the foundation. J'ai le grand plaisir de vous présenter Cameron Bailey. This is just a little bit of what he has been up to. Cameron Bailey is the artistic director of the Toronto International Film Festival. He's responsible for the overall vision and execution of festival programming, as well as maintaining relationships with the Canadian and international film industries. Toronto Life has named him one of Toronto's 50 most influential people 4 years in a row. Cameron, I hope that you have sufficiently recovered from all the excitement this past September. I would like to welcome you to the stage for our Fireside Chat. And joining him is David Peck. David is the founder of So Change, a social enterprise that works alongside members of the corporate and NGO community in areas such as fundraising, advocacy, and donor relations. He's a writer, a speaker, and a lecturer. David was named a global hero by Verge magazine in 2009. And I welcome them both to the stage. Je vous invite à monter sur scène like you have. Thank you very much. And I will now leave it to you to...
Thank you, Marcy. I'm going to wait for the applause to die down before I continue. Cameron, thank you for coming today, for joining us here at the Inclusive Canada 2017. How about a hand for Cameron Bailey?
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Thank you, David.
Sorry to interrupt the salad course, but we're going to do our best to not only be meaningful here tonight, but also to be light and to have a little bit of fun. Cameron, I think the question really that everybody's really interested in here tonight is, how come you're so much better looking than I am?
I don't know what to say to that exactly, but I presume there's a follow-up question of some kind.
Isn't there always a follow-up question? So Toronto International Film Festival, big year, almost 400 films. I mean, how does anyone even choose to go to see one or two films? I don't know. How many people were out at the festival this year? Did anyone get out there this year? Excellent. We probably have a few favorites, even the photographer. That's awesome. Give us a couple of highlights. What really stood out for you?
It was a big year. It was our 41st year. We're just coming off our big 40th anniversary last year. We opened with a film called The Magnificent Seven, which is a remake of actually the great film by Akira Kurosawa. That was, of course, remade in 1960 as a Western. Seven Samurai became Magnificent Seven, became this film that Antoine Fuqua made with Denzel Washington and Chris Pratt, a wonderful Korean actor Lee Byung-hun. And that really kicked the festival off because it was essentially our statement about what kind of festival it was going to be. Magnificent Seven is a film that reinvents a classic Japanese and Hollywood movie from a very diverse perspective. It's very much about what the Old West actually might have felt like, where there were a real mix of people of European and Asian and African and indigenous descent all living and working together, and sometimes fighting as well together, as you see in the film. And so throughout the rest of the festival, we had films from 83 different countries. We had hundreds and hundreds of guests come in from all over the world to present their films. We had just a remarkable lineup. Of course, there are always celebrities and movie stars there, but for us, what's even more important is when our audience, which is roughly around 400,000 attendees every year, connects with these films that sometimes come only once to Toronto, and that may be your only chance to see them.
Do you ever find yourself at like 2 a.m. throughout the festival, scrolling through Twitter, just to see how people are feeling, what they're saying about some of the films?
I mean, I'm definitely interested, and so sometimes the emotional reaction that people actually take onto social media immediately after they've seen a film. It happened with La La Land, which won our audience award this year. It happened with a film called Moonlight.
Little Oscar buzz around La La Land.
That may well go on to some Oscar praise. We'll see. And then Moonlight, which was a film by an African-American director, Barry Jenkins, also did very well. It's opening actually tomorrow in Toronto. And that was one that people really did just pour out their emotional reaction to on social media.
I saw Cameron introduce a film that I'm going to highly recommend that everyone here sees by a filmmaker who I think has become one of my favorite filmmakers now, and there's no relation, but Raoul Peck. He's a Haitian filmmaker, and I watched Cameron introduce him at the Lightbox, and the film is I Am Not Your Negro. And I highly recommend you get out and see it, because for a variety of reasons, partially because of who narrates it and how brilliantly they do that, partially because of the topic, the way it's done. It's about the writings, really, of James Baldwin, but the relevance, Cameron, today is profound to me. And I had the privilege of interviewing James for a podcast that I do, and I asked him a few questions, and one of the things he said to me that I think really, I hope connects, he said, you know, David, it's amazing what you get when you travel outside of your country.
Raoul Peck is a fascinating character and filmmaker. He is Haitian. He was born in Haiti. He returned after many years in Europe and in New York, having lived in Berlin and in France and in Belgium. He returned as Haiti's Minister of Culture at a certain point, and in between he's been making films. He made a remarkable documentary and a fiction film on Patrice Lumumba, the revolutionary hero. And then he's just recently made this film about James Baldwin, who really is, I think, one of the most astute, insightful writers on race relations and race conflict in the U.S. And what Peck has done in this film is he's actually connected Baldwin's writings from the 1970s, from an unpublished book he was going to publish in the 1970s, to what's going on right now in the U.S., to Black Lives Matter, to the conflict between black communities and police, to police violence, to the kind of political dynamics that are going on right now. And so you see, Baldwin's words actually illuminate some of what we're looking at right now.
And Samuel Jackson, I guess, can I say he plays Baldwin?
He voices Baldwin's words, and he does it. I mean, the two of them couldn't be more different in terms of their persona. Baldwin being very much a kind of East Coast intellectual, but Sam Jackson somehow is able to really bring those words to life.
He really is, and he kind of incarnates the character. I mean, just right from the get-go, I was drawn in not only by the filmmaking and the story, but also by the voice and the way he articulates Baldwin's words. Like, I think true segregation has something to do with ignorance and apathy, which I thought.
Baldwin kind of had these incredible aphorisms somehow that seem to sum up very complex social dynamics in just a few words. He's amazing.
So TIFF is about, and I think conferences like this, I think most people would agree, and we're gonna be looking, or at least the Canadian Race Relations Foundation is going to be looking at the surveys afterwards to find out. But I think conferences like these really do change the way we see the splash and ripple effect, and so on. That's kind of the vision of TIFF. That's, transform the way people see the world.
Our mission is to transform the way people see the world through film. We do see cinema as an opportunity to generate empathy, to understand other perspectives and other ways of living in a very powerful way. We're used to it now, but it's a kind of a gift, really, to be able to go to a festival, not just ours, but any film festival, and see films from all over the world, to really put yourself in the shoes and to look through the eyes of an artist who comes from a completely different context. We had films from Bhutan, we had films from Mali, and
Myanmar, I think.
From Myanmar, from many, far-flung places that many of us may never get to visit. The great thing about Toronto, though, is that whatever country a film comes from, there will always be someone in our audience at the festival who knows that place intimately. And so that conversation that happens between the people who are seeing that place for the first time and the people who know it, who know the language, who know the textures and the kind of the nuances of the place, that's always fascinating. And sometimes that happens most powerfully with Canadian films. We had a film called The Searchers by an Inuk filmmaker, Zacharias Canuck. And, I've never been to the far north, to Nunavut, where he lives. Many people in our audience haven't been there yet, but you see through his filmmaking a perspective and a way of telling stories, actually, that is very distinct to Inuit culture. And that is something that, I really do feel, is a gift and something that we have to really treasure every time we can come together to watch someone else's perspective, illuminate the world for us.
Maybe a silly question, but I think we could all fairly land here, I think, on the answer. But you still believe that empathy, hope, change?
I am a true believer, yes. I actually, because I've seen it. I see it every time we screen movies, We have people who come in, sometimes they just want to learn a little bit more. I don't know where Myanmar is on a map, so I want to learn a little bit more about this place. I want to understand something about the culture. And they can come out not just with that, but with empathy, with an emotional understanding. And the great thing about movies is that they're a very powerful medium. It's a giant screen. We're sitting together in an audience, and we, in a way, are powerless, before the force of the huge image, the sound that surrounds you, the fact that you're with other people. It's a very emotionally impactful experience. In a way, whether you want to or not, it's hard to resist the power of cinema.
There's a sense too, Cameron, when you walk out of the theater, you can't go back, right? You've been introduced to a family, a story, a way of seeing and understanding. You can't shut that down now, or maybe you can.
Not. I think films have varying degrees of success in terms of the impact they have on people. Some movies are forgettable as soon as you walk out of the theater. I hope that the movies we show do have a lasting impact on people. Sometimes that people are shaken to the core by what they see on screen. They might see an experience that is very close to their own, or sometimes what's most powerful is when you see a story that's set in the past, and it may be a past that your parents might have experienced. I remember, we showed a film called The United Kingdom, which is set in 1947 in London, and it's about the story of a man who was in line to become the king of Botswana, who was in London studying law, and a white woman he fell in love with there, and their love story. My parents got to London from Barbados a few years after that, but just to see those stories unfold in the streets of London, where being a black man at the time meant you were at risk just walking down the street, made me think of my father, who was there in the 1950s, just a few years later. And so those kinds of experiences can also be very, very powerful.
Yeah, really, there was another great film this year, An Insignificant Man, a documentary about the rise of this politician in India that just kind of turned things upside down, and just such I guess that power of incremental change, everything but insignificant, as it turns out.
Yeah, I think what you can see through film, films are all constructed, so it's not like this is a window on the world necessarily, but if the filmmaking is good, what I think you can see is how similar many things are. An Insignificant Man is about an opposition political leader in the north of India, the area around New Delhi, who's leading a political movement against fundamentalism, essentially, in India. And so the process of starting a political party, going out and mobilizing voters and trying to make political change is very similar to what we may experience here, what we're certainly seeing across the border. And yet you also see the specifics, how even though some things are common, there are some things that are very specific to the particular place and time.
Could the tagline for TIFF be similarity through difference?
It could be, yeah. I think that's what we're trying to do when we show movies from 83 different countries, is to show the diversity of experience, the diversity of perspectives around the world. But through that, we hope people connect. We hope they see the points of connection, the things that do unite us.
So 83 countries, just under 400 films, I think.
Yeah, about 300 features and about almost another 100 shorts.
Gender and race issues seem to play a pretty significant role, from what I could tell as I flipped through the catalog. And if you haven't had that experience, you really need to. The fresh ink, the $40 price tag. You really do need to experience it. Is that a conscious choice at TIFF, or do you think that's kind of almost a trend from a filmmaking perspective? And I do have a follow-up question to that for sure, but I'm just wondering, gender and race really seem to be prominent.
We started as a festival that was designed from the very beginning in 1976 to reflect the diversity of the city of Toronto. And at that time, Toronto was already changing a lot. My family and many others were beginning to come from all over the world. So diversity was always a part of what the festival wanted to do, but it's changed so much in the last 4 decades. And in the last few years, there's been a real debate, a push to make what we see on the big screen reflect more of the diversity of the lives that we're all leading. And so I'm very aware of that, and I wanted our programming team to go out and find the best films they could that reflected essentially just what the world is, what our city of Toronto, what our country just how we live with each other, and that should just be normal. It shouldn't be something exceptional, and I'm trying to bring that more into the programming. The fact is, though, that the film industry is still catching up. At the Hollywood level, in terms of the movies you see, the mainstream movies you see in your multiplexes, only 7% of those movies are directed by women. 93% are directed by men. At our festival, the numbers are better. Overall, we had almost 30% directed by women, but still, that's not close to the human reality. It's much better than commercial cinema, but there's still a long way to go. So we are trying to just paint a picture that's fuller and richer and more representative of just how we live, and get away from some of those limitations that we've seen in the past.
So UK, Barbados, you've sat on film juries, Burkina Faso, for heaven's sakes. I mean, anyone who's been to Ouagadougou is okay with me.
It's a great town.
It's a great town. Has that had an impact on the way, your sort of man of the world global perspective? Has that changed the way not only you see the world, but the way that you're programming at TIFF? Your story.
It has. I mean, I think I was lucky to begin with. I didn't see myself as lucky many years ago when I was a child, but I was born in England. I left England when I was 4 years old, got on a ship with my sister and went to Barbados without our parents, landed in Barbados, stayed with our grandparents for 4 years, and when I landed in Barbados, of course I had an English accent. I had to lose that right away, so I wouldn't be teased every day at school. Spent 4 years in Barbados, and then came here to Canada when I was 8, and I had to lose my Bajan accent right away. Same thing. So I got used to culture shifting, to code switching, to that kind of fluidity, I guess, that many people who are migrants, I think, get used to. And so when I got this job and I started to travel around the world, I was comfortable in many different places. And I loved, I've been going, for instance, to India at least once a year for the last 10 years. I've been going to China at least once a year for the last 5 years. And I've been lucky enough to travel for my work. And what I like about that is that I like being displaced now. When I was young, it filled me with fear to not fit in. And now that feeling is just very comfortable.
So sadly, we're going to have to wrap this up soon. I don't know about you guys, but I could go on for another 20 or 25 minutes. But maybe a nice way to sort of, James Baldwin said, in I Am Not Your Negro, he said, well, he said it elsewhere, but he said, quote, "What's your role in this country, and what's your future in it?" And the way Sam Jackson delivers it, in the context of the film, in the context for me of the festival, not only is it a question that I took with me out of the theater, I think it's something that really has kind of framed kind of everything I do. Now, do you roll out of bed every morning asking yourself that question? But isn't that why we're here tonight? Isn't that why we're here for the last, isn't that why organizations, like the Canadian Race Relations Foundation exist, and so on? And it's about moving the conversation and transforming the world.
Look, I think it's easy for all of us to become kind of contained by the limits of our understanding, our own personal experience, by fears we may have, and to have those limitations become walls. And what I think all of us can do in whatever way, and I'm sure every member of this organization does that, and we certainly try to do it at TIFF, is to just melt those walls down. We don't have to break them down necessarily, but we have to dissolve them somehow. And sometimes it's slow, it's incremental, but I think that when we push people beyond their limitations, beyond their fears, I do believe that there's something positive about human beings, that they actually want to grow, they want to expand. And we try to do that through movies.
Ladies and gentlemen, he's the artistic director for the Toronto International Film Festival. Please, a round of applause for Cameron Bailey.
Thank you.